Hello everyone and welcome to this presentation entitled Assisted Walking in Place, Introducing Assisted Motion to Walking by Cycling in Embodied Virtual Reality. I'm Yann Moullec and here are my co-authors. So our motivation for this work was quite simple. We wanted to work towards providing effortless and compelling walking simulations in embodied virtual reality. So among locomotion techniques, you often have this distinction between on one hand, device-based locomotion techniques, which are called artificial, and body-based or physical locomotion techniques. So physical locomotion techniques are often more engaging, but also more fatiguing. So we wanted to work on how to reduce the effort induced by motion-based locomotion techniques. To do so, we propose assisted walking in place. So assisted walking in place, or assisted WIP, consists in introducing assisted motion or passive motion to walking in place. In this work, we also apply the concept of assisted WIP to walking by cycling. So walking by cycling is a walking in place technique, which consists in mapping a cycling motion to the walking animation and virtual locomotion of an avatar. We also conduct a user study where we assess whether we can reduce the perceived effort without impairing the walking experience. So in this study, we focus on perceived effort and fatigue, as well as embodiment and walking sensation. In the literature, past work has showed that physical locomotion techniques require more effort to operate than artificial locomotion techniques. To overcome this issue, several solutions have been explored. The first one was to vary the body motions. For instance, Nielsen and colleagues showed that heel tapping induced less effort than knee raising. Other work proposed more abstract metaphors like finger-based walking in place, for instance, and other work by Bruno and colleagues augmented walking in place with speed gains. So this allowed to travel more distance in the virtual environment with the same amount of effort. Our approach in this context is to assist a walking in place motion with a motorized device. In our study, we also compare passive and active motion with regards to walking sensation and embodiment. In the literature on walking sensation, which is also referred to as walking naturalness or walking realism, it was shown that walking sensation could be induced by both active and passive movements, but very few comparisons exist between active and passive movements with regard to walking sensation. So we compare both active and passive cycling in terms of walking sensation in embodied virtual reality. As far as embodiment is concerned, the literature is quite clear. Passive motion and active motion induce similar levels of ownership, while passive motion induce less agency than active motion. So our study provides new results on active and passive cycling in a more ecological context than previous work from the literature. So we conducted a within subject user study with 3 conditions. The first one is called condition assisted, where the user's legs are driven by the motorized bike and the cycling motion is mapped onto the walking of the avatar. Then the second condition is called condition active, and in this condition the user has to actively cycle at the same rate as the previous condition using the speed gauge. And finally, the last condition is a static condition where the user cannot move their legs and just have to observe the walking simulation. So for each condition, the simulation lasted 4 minutes and 30 seconds with 30 seconds in front of a mirror and 4 minutes of walking. And in all 3 conditions, participants had to look down 12 times during the simulations in order to see the avatar and foster embodiment. So as you could see in the videos, the orientation of the HMD was mapped onto the orientation of the avatar's head, as well as onto the orientation of the viewport. In the active and assisted condition, the cycling was mapped onto the avatar's gait cycle as explained before, and for each of the conditions, perceived effort, fatigue, embodiment, and walking sensation and cyber sickness were measured using dedicated questionnaires. Now on to the results and discussion. So first, perceived effort. So the results of our study show that condition assisted indeed induces less perceived effort than condition active, and that both condition with a cycling motion, rather active or passive, induce more perceived effort than condition static. As far as perceived fatigue is concerned, we found no significant difference between the conditions. This shows that assisted walking in place may prove useful for long uses, but that future work with longer exposure times may be needed in order to confirm this assumption, since we did not report any significant difference in terms of perceived fatigue, but it is discussed in the paper that this may be attributed to the rather short exposure times in our study. For walking sensation, condition static induced less walking sensation than conditions assisted and active, which is what we expected. However, we expected to get a significant difference between conditions assisted and active, which was not the case in our results. This may show that active motion may not be necessary to render a good walking experience. As for ownership, condition static induced less ownership than conditions active and assisted, which was expected, and condition assisted induced less agency than condition active, and condition static even less than the other two conditions. So this confirms previous results in a more ecological context, and it also shows that even though assisted walking in place reduces agency, it still induces reasonable levels of both ownership and agency. So we skipped some of the results of our study. If you want more details, please refer to the paper. Now on to the conclusions and perspectives. So in this work, our main contributions were to introduce assisted motion to walking in place. We applied the concept of assisted walking in place to walking by cycling. We conducted a user study which focused on walking experience, and this study showed that assisted whip could indeed reduce perceived effort, and that it induced similar levels of ownership and walking sensation compared to unassisted walking in place, but that it induced less agency. In the future, assisted walking in place could prove useful for injured or disabled users. It could be useful also in prolonged VR simulations for a variety of users, and it could be used in medical rehabilitations or virtual visits. In general, this work paves the way towards effortless and compelling walking simulations in embodied virtual reality. So these are the references from this talk. And I thank you for your attention. If you have any question, I will be glad to answer them.